Hi, fifth grade. Today we are going to be looking at decimal place value. So I went ahead and kind of made some pre-notes for you guys so that you can take these notes if that's what you're doing. But remember, I'm also keeping up with this in a digital notebook that if for some reason you can't write or you don't have your materials just yet, you have access to this digital notebook. So I'm going to write that in my um, table of contents. So right after order of operations, we had decimal place value. We're going to talk about rounding. So since we're talking about rounding, we've already done rounding with whole numbers. And this time, so this was the very first thing we talked about was place value. So if you have this chart, you can go back. I think I asked you guys if you had two, you could make a copy of it, or you can just look at it or create your own. I told you if you wanted to draw it, this is what it looks like. So if you want to go back to that, you can reference this. But I also just made the same, pretty similar to what I did here. So what I did is I made kind of like my own version of a place value chart. I just went to ones, tens, and if I were to keep going, it'd be hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and so on. But since we're looking at decimals, I wanted to emphasize or really, really, really look at the decimal place value system. Um, so we're going to look at that. Okay. So here's my little chart that I made here. So we're going to look at this number here. Okay. Oh, let me fix this so it can stop being blurry. 1 second. See if I can fix it. There it goes. We can lock it. All right. Sorry about that. So again, this is a place value chart. I don't know why it's still going blurry. Let's try it again. Okay, so this is the place value chart. Here we go, take 3, right? Here's a place value chart here that we're looking at. And like I said, this is my decimal here, and we're looking to the right of that decimal. And that's what we're going to be looking at today for these place values, okay? So for decimals, we're only going to the thousandths. Now, one thing when you're talking about decimals, the one thing you want to emphasize or the thing you really, really, really want to do so you can distinguish between is that THS at the end. Okay, tenths, almost like you're spitting, but don't spit, right? Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And so after you start saying it after a while, it kind of gets a little difficult, but you'll get it. So we're going to look here. So I have 0.4. Okay. So if I'm going to say that, I'm going to look at the number I see here, 4. And what place is that 4 in? It's located in the tenths. So I say this number as 4 tenths. And I can write it in word form as well, 4 tenths. Now, one of the reasons why you see these zeros behind here, those zeros, so this only applies when you're dealing with decimals. Okay, so I'll repeat that. This only applies when you're dealing with decimals. So if I'm dealing with decimals, these zeros count as my placeholders. Now, what that means is let's say I were adding decimals. Well, if I want to add 4 tenths plus 15 hundredths, how would I do that? So I'm going to write that down. And the one thing you want to do is whenever you're adding decimals or subtracting decimals, you want to make sure that you line up that place. Okay, so I have 0 and 4 tenths plus 0. Remember, I'm going to line this up and 15 hundredths. Okay, now notice here with this 4 tenths, there's really nothing behind it, right? Well, when you're dealing with decimals, you can put a 0 here as a placeholder. Now that only works for decimals, okay? This is going to be very crucial when you're adding and subtracting. So if I want to add that, 5 plus 0 is 5, 4 plus 1, 5, bring the decimal down, there's my 0. So when I add these two together, I get 55 hundredths. Okay, so that would be my sum here. So that's why we add those zeros there. We add those zeros for placeholders in case we need to add or subtract. or for tomorrow, we're going to be comparing those numbers. So moving on. When I'm rounding, I'm doing the same exact thing that I did with whole numbers. I'm going to round 24 hundredths, right? I'm going to read the number like I see it, and then what's the last digit located? So 24 hundredths to the nearest tenth. So I'm going to underline the tenths place, look at my neighbor to the right, right? And what does this number tell us? Well, if it's 4 or less, what's going to happen to the underlined digit? It's going to stay the same. So I can write it as 2/10, or add the 0 there, 20 hundredths, okay? I can write it either way. It's going to be the same value. Now, when I read, I'm going to round 245 thousandths. Okay, so whenever I'm reading these decimals, I'm going to say the number first, 245, and then where does that 5 end? Ends on the thousandths, so 245 thousandths to the nearest hundredth. So I'm going to find the digit in the hundredths place. It is the 4. I'm going to look at my neighbor to the right. Okay, and if it's 5 or more, I'm going to add one more. So that's going to round it's going to add one more to this 4. So 250 thousandths, or I can write it as 25 hundredths. Remember, I can put the 0 here or not, okay, because that's going to be that placeholder, but this still has the same value, okay? So for today, you're going to have an activity where you are also rounding, and that's going to be all for today.